A millionaire abandoned his baby on the road to not survive. Years later, the millionaire shuddered at being saved by a beggar identical to him. Jonathan Henderson adjusted the knot of his Italian silk tie in front of the Venetian mirror of his mansion. His brown eyes, cold as a winter night, fixed on his own image, while his fingers drummed nervously on the marble countertop. The baby's cry echoed through the luxurious hallways, penetrating every room of the house like a silent accusation. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the glass of whiskey, while whispering to himself, "You have no choice, Jonathan. This baby will destroy everything you've built. Helena would never agree to marry the man who had a child with a maid." The businessman climbed the marble stairs, his heavy footsteps echoing through the empty mansion since Lillian's death. The maid who dared to enter his world. The baby's room, hastily decorated and hidden in the farthest wing of the house, kept the biggest secret of his life. Through the half-open door, he observed the crying child in the crib, so small and frail. His hardened heart faltered for a moment when the baby stopped crying upon seeing him. "Why did you have to be born? Lillian should have done what I told her. Now she's dead. And you're the proof of my biggest mistake." The black clouds began to form in the sky when Jonathan wrapped the baby in Lillian's blue blanket. His hands, experienced in closing million-dollar deals, now trembled as they touched the delicate skin of his son. The small silver locket, the only gift Lillian had left for the baby, shone faintly in the dim light of the room. Jonathan considered tearing off the jewel, but something stopped him. In his mind, Lillian's last plea echoed, "Promise me you'll take care of him, Jonathan. Promise our son will have a decent life." Descending the stairs with the baby in his arms, Jonathan felt the weight of his decision increase with each step. The phone rang, making him stop halfway. It was Helena, his fiancée, the senator's daughter, his passport to the power he so craved. He let the answering machine pick up the message. "Love, I'm so excited about the wedding preparations. Daddy managed to confirm the governor's presence at the ceremony. Isn't it wonderful? You'll be the most powerful man in the state," she said. The mansion's garage was silent when Jonathan placed the baby on the back seat of his Mercedes. The contrast between the Italian leather and the baby's simple blanket seemed to scream the difference between the two worlds he tried to keep separate. As he started the car, his hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he murmured, "It's better this way. You'll have a chance to live without carrying the weight of my name, and I can live without carrying the mark of my weakness," he said, without looking at his son so as not to regret his decision. The first raindrops began to fall as the car left the mansion gates. Jonathan drove in silence, watching in the rearview mirror as the baby slept, oblivious to his fate. The streets became more deserted as they moved away from the center. In his mind, Lillian's voice still echoed, "Our love may not have been planned, Jonathan, but this baby is proof that something true was born from it." The storm was increasing its strength when Jonathan stopped the car on a deserted road on the outskirts of the city. The place was dark, surrounded by ancient trees that danced with the strong wind. His hands trembled as he opened the rear door. The baby woke up, his eyes, so similar to his own, staring at him with an innocence that made him hesitate. "Why do you have to have my eyes? Why did you have to look so much like me?" he asked, more to himself. The cold wind cut his face as he walked with the baby in his arms. With each step, he felt the weight of his decision increase. The little one began to cry as if sensing the danger. Jonathan stopped, looking at his son one last time. "Don't cry. You're a Henderson even if no one but me knows it, and Hendersons don't cry. Can't cry." The rain was now falling with full force when Jonathan placed the baby on the ground, protected only by the blanket. The silver locket briefly shone under a lightning bolt. It was the same locket that Hannah had given Jonathan when they first met. His hands lingered a few seconds longer on the tiny body, feeling its warmth one last time. In his mind, Lillian's voice sounded like a curse. "One day you'll regret every choice you made, Jonathan. Fate has mysterious ways of making us pay for our mistakes." He remembered. The path back to the car seemed endless. Each step was accompanied by the baby's cry, mingling with the sound of the storm. Jonathan got into the vehicle, his soaked clothes staining the impeccable upholstery. Looking in the rearview mirror, he saw the small blue bundle under the rain. A simple life is better than a life marred by shame. One day you'll understand. Or maybe not. The minutes inside the car seemed eternal. Jonathan couldn't start the engine and leave. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. The sound of the rain was deafening, but it couldn't drown out the baby's cry that still echoed in his ears. He spoke out loud as if trying to convince himself, "You're doing the right thing. This baby deserves a real family, not a father who is ashamed of his existence." The rumble of the engine finally broke the interior silence of the car. Jonathan engaged gear, ready to leave behind the evidence of his weakness. It was then that his eyes caught something in the rearview mirror. Lights approaching at high speed. My God, no! A car! He won't see the baby in the rain. Cold sweat trickled down his forehead as he watched, paralyzed, the lights getting closer and closer, to the small blue bundle left on the road. Time seemed to have stopped. In his mind, Lillian's voice sounded stronger than ever. The truth always finds its way, Jonathan, no matter how long it takes. The lights of the approaching car lit up the road like two accusing eyes. Jonathan could see the small bundle of the blue blanket now, so vulnerable under the storm. His heart was beating so hard, it seemed to want to escape his chest. In a hoarse whisper, he let slip, "What have I done? My God, what have I done? This can't be the end. It can't end like this." Meanwhile, Hannah quickened her pace down the dark road, her worn shoes soaked by the relentless rain. The blue domestic worker's uniform clung to her body as she struggled against the wind that seemed intent on knocking her down. Her muscles ached after a long day of cleaning houses, but she couldn't stop. She was the only one who still used that deserted path to get home. Her thoughts echoed in the stormy night. God, why did the bus have to break down today of all days? This path gives me the creeps, especially on a night like this. The storm was increasing its fury, turning the dirt road into a treacherous quagmire. Hannah adjusted the broken umbrella, a useless protection against the force of nature. Her tired eyes tried to see the path ahead, while her feet sank into the mud. It was then that a different sound caught her attention, a faint cry almost drowned out by the storm. That cry sounds like a baby. It can't be what I'm thinking. Or can it? Who would be so cruel as to leave a child on a night like this? Hannah's heart raced when she saw the lights of a car approaching at high speed. For a moment she thought of waving for help, but something stopped her. The vehicle sped past her like lightning, throwing water on her already drenched clothes. It was then that she saw it, a small blue bundle in the middle of the road right in the path of the approaching lights. My God, it really is a baby. He's going to get run over, she thought too quickly. Without a second thought, Hannah dropped her bag and umbrella, running towards the bundle. Her feet slipped in the mud, but she couldn't stop. The sound of the engine was getting closer and closer, the lights already illuminating the small bundle on the ground. In her mind, a single plea repeated, "Please, Lord, give me strength. Don't let this child die. I can't let this happen." With one last desperate push, Hannah threw herself over the bundle, rolling to the side of the road. The car sped past, its tires raising a curtain of water where seconds before the baby had been. She clutched the small package to her chest, feeling her heart beating erratically. "Calm down, little one, calm down. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you while I'm here." Trembling with cold and adrenaline, Hannah carefully opened the soaked blanket. The baby was pale, his skin as cold as marble. A small silver pendant hung around his neck, the only clue to his origin. Her work-worn hands caressed the delicate little face. Who would do such a wicked thing to an innocent child? You're so small, so defenseless. The rain continued to fall relentlessly as Hannah tried to protect the baby with her own body. She noticed the child's lips were turning blue, his breathing weaker and weaker. Panic began to grip her chest. "No, please, don't give up. You've survived until now. You have to keep fighting. I'll get you out of here. I'll save you." With trembling legs, Hannah stood up, keeping the baby firmly against her chest. Each step was a struggle against the mud and wind, but she couldn't stop. The little body in her arms seemed to grow colder by the minute. "Hang in there, my angel. My house isn't far. I'll warm you up. It'll be all right." The path to her humble home had never seemed so long. Hannah could feel the baby's breathing becoming more shallow, more difficult. Her own tears mingled with the rain streaming down her face. "Don't you dare leave me, little one. God wouldn't have put you in my path if it wasn't to save you." The sight of her simple house appeared like a beacon in the storm. Hannah quickened her pace, her legs heavy with exhaustion and the weight of responsibility. The baby let out a faint moan, so faint it was barely audible. "Just a little longer, my love. We're almost there. Don't give up now." With trembling hands, Hannah finally managed to open the door to her home. The modest interior had never felt so welcoming. She hurried to turn on the old heater, wrapping the baby in dry blankets. "Come on, little warrior, react. Show that you're stronger than this cold." Time seemed to drag as Hannah gently rubbed the baby's little arms and legs, trying to restore his circulation. Her silent prayers were interrupted only by the sound of rain on the window. "Our Lady, don't let this little angel depart. He has already suffered too much for such a small life." A flash of lightning illuminated the room, revealing the baby's pale face. Hannah noticed in horror that his lips were turning blue, his skin growing colder despite the blankets. "No, no, no! React, my love. I'm here with you. I won't let you leave." Suddenly, the worst happened. The baby stopped moving. Hannah put her ear to his tiny chest, desperately searching for any sign of life. The silence that followed was deafening. "Oh God, he's not breathing. What do I do? What do I do?" Panic took over Hannah as she held the small, lifeless body in her arms. Her tears fell on the baby's motionless face while the storm raged outside. "Come back to me, little angel. I can't lose you like this." Not after having found you. Hannah didn't think twice before initiating mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on the baby. Her trembling hands gently pressed on the tiny chest, recalling the first aid course she had taken years ago at the community center. Time seemed frozen as she struggled to bring the child back, her tears mingling with the sweat of the effort. Between compressions, her choked voice whispered, "Come back to me, my angel. I won't give up on you. I can't give up on you now." The first sign of life came as a faint gasp, followed by a weak cry that sounded like music to Hannah's ears. Without wasting time, she wrapped the baby in dry blankets and ran out into the street. The rain was still falling, but with less intensity. Her arms protected the child as she shouted for help. A passing neighbor stopped his old car when he saw the scene. "Help me, please. I found this abandoned baby. He needs urgent medical attention. I don't know how long he'll last." The race to the public hospital was an eternity compressed into minutes. Hannah held the baby against her chest, feeling each faint breath like a small victory. The car jolted over the potholes in the road, and she could feel the little one's heart beating irregularly. Her eyes never left the pale little face. "Hold on tight, my love. We're almost at the hospital. You're strong. You're a warrior." The emergency room was packed, but the baby's critical condition meant he was seen immediately. Hannah watched helplessly as the doctors examined the child, her hands clasped in prayer, her lips moving silently. A nurse tried to lead her to the waiting room, but she resisted. "I can't leave him alone. He only has me in this world. He was abandoned. If he wakes up in a strange place, he'll be scared." The following hours were a blur of tests and more tests. Hannah never left the ICU room for a minute, her eyes fixed on the door where the baby had disappeared. When the doctor finally appeared, his grave expression made her heart sink. His words fell like stones. "The baby has a severe heart condition. Without surgery, he won't survive the next month, and the procedure costs more than the hospital can cover," the doctor said, handing her a paper with the cost of the baby's treatment. Hannah felt the world spin as she heard the cost of the procedure. It was more money than she would earn in years of work. Her hands clutched the silver locket she had taken from the baby's neck, the only clue to his origin. With a steady voice, despite the tears, she declared, "No matter what, I'll get this money, even if I have to work day and night. This little angel won't die, not while I can fight," she told the doctor. The following days became a race against time. Hannah barely slept, splitting herself between her regular job, extra cleaning gigs, and the fundraising campaign she had started. She went door to door telling the story of the abandoned baby to anyone who would listen. Her hands, already calloused from work, were now also marked by the paper flyers she handed out. Every penny counts. I can't let the lack of money determine whether a child lives or dies. The small hospital room became her second home. Hannah spent every free moment there, talking to the baby, singing lullabies, praying. The machines beeped constantly, marking the irregular rhythm of the tiny heart. One night, as she held his little hand through the incubator, she promised, "You are not alone in this world anymore, my love." Now you have a mother. I may not be your biological mother, but I will be the one who moves heaven and earth to save you." News of the campaign began to spread through the city. Small donations arrived daily, some coins here, some bills there. Hannah guarded each contribution like a treasure, thanking each donor with tears in her eyes. In her few hours of sleep, she dreamed of the day when she could take the baby home. People still have goodness in their hearts. Maybe that's what this little angel came to teach us. Time, however, was running out. The baby's condition worsened with each passing day, and the amount raised was still far from what was needed. Hannah could see in the doctor's eyes that they were losing hope. One afternoon, after another exhausting day of work and campaigning, she collapsed into a chair beside the incubator. "I won't give up on you. Even if I have to sell my soul, I will get this money." The machines monitoring the baby began to show worrying signs. The doctors increased the medication, but it was like trying to block out the sun with a sieve. Hannah watched helplessly as more and more machines were connected to the tiny body. During the early hours of the morning, alone in the room, she clutched her rosary beads tightly. "Please, God, give me more time, just a little more time." The 15th day of hospitalization arrived with devastating news. The hospital administrator entered the room, his cold words cutting through the air like razors. "I'm sorry, but we cannot keep the equipment on without a payment guarantee. We have other patients waiting. If the amount is not deposited by tomorrow, we'll have to turn off the devices. I'm sorry." The reality of that situation hit Hannah like a punch. She looked at the baby, so small and fragile amid all those tubes and wires. Her life savings and all the donations barely reached half of the required amount. In her desperation, an idea began to form. Maybe if I find out who abandoned this little angel. No, I can't think about that now. I need to find another way out. The sun was starting to set when the final ultimatum arrived. A nurse entered the room with an official paper, the notification that the devices would be turned off the next morning. Hannah held the document with trembling hands, her eyes running over the words that sentenced her little angel. Her voice came out as a choked whisper. "What do I do now, my God? How do I save my son?" The hours dragged on like an eternity as Hannah watched over the baby's restless sleep. The silver locket shone under the dim light of the room, as if it held a secret that could change everything. She held it between her fingers, observing the details of the jewelry too expensive to have belonged to someone simple. "I won't give up. By tomorrow, I'll find a way." God doesn't abandon those who care for others with kindness in their hearts. I know everything will be resolved. You also can't give up, little one, because I won't give up. The next day, Hannah was sitting in the hospital corridor, her silent tears marking the worn linoleum floor. The deadline for payment would end in an hour, and she could still hear the sound of the machines keeping her little angel alive. Her hands clutched the silver locket, as if it could give her the answers she so desperately sought. That's when a frail-looking lady leaning on a cane stopped in front of her. Her tired eyes had a glint of recognition. "Are you the girl who found the abandoned baby? Please, tell me everything about that night. I've heard some things about you and the little baby." The lady, who introduced herself as Mrs. Virginia, listened intently to every detail of the story, her hands trembling more and more. Her pale and haggard face showed signs of a serious illness, but there was an urgency in her gestures that Hannah couldn't understand. When she mentioned the locket, the lady's eyes filled with tears. "I gave that locket to my daughter Lillian on the day she told me she was pregnant." Hannah's heart raced as she heard those words. The lady struggled to her feet, asking to see the baby. Upon arriving at the ICU, Mrs. Virginia pressed her hand against the glass, her eyes fixed on the little face that so resembled her late daughter's. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Lillian died in childbirth, but before she passed away, she made me promise to protect her son. I searched for him for weeks, but never thought I'd find my grandson like this." With trembling hands, Mrs. Virginia opened her worn purse and took out a yellowed envelope stained by time. Her fingers caressed the paper for a moment, as if bidding farewell to something precious. Inside were several old bills, some already faded, all her life savings kept for an emergency. "When I heard about a fundraiser for a sick, abandoned baby, I knew it could be a clue. Use this money, it was for my treatment, but it's too late for me. My grandson needs to live, he needs to know the truth about his origins," the lady said, making Hannah's eyes widen as she saw the amount of money, immediately trying to return the envelope. "I can't accept it, Ma'am. It's too much money." "But Mrs." Virginia held her hands with a surprising strength for someone so frail. "I want my grandson to live. He deserves a chance at life. I've lived long enough." Hannah felt the weight of that envelope in her hands, not only from the money it contained, but from the story it carried. Each bill seemed to tell a tale of sacrifice, of years of hard work and saving. Her eyes filled with tears as she counted the money. It was exactly the amount needed for the surgery. "Mrs." Virginia watched in silence, her breathing becoming increasingly difficult, but a small smile of satisfaction on her pale lips. "Go, my child. Time is passing. Save my grandson while I can still see." With her heart racing, Hannah ran to the hospital administration. Her steps echoed through the empty corridors, the envelope clutched to her chest as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The administrator, who was already gathering his belongings to leave, looked incredulous when she placed the money on his desk. He began to methodically count the bills, each movement of his fingers seeming like an eternity to Hannah, who couldn't stop thinking about the baby connected to the machines. The hospital administrator could hardly believe it when he finished counting. It was the total amount for the surgery. His face showed a mixture of surprise and relief as he began filling out the necessary paperwork. Next, they went to the baby's room in the ICU, where Virginia, who had slowly dragged herself there, held Hannah's hand tightly. Her breathing was heavier, and drops of cold sweat trickled down her pale forehead. "I need to tell you something about the baby's father. He's a powerful man, someone who destroyed my Lillian's life. If my daughter knew what he did to the boy." The machines began to be prepared for surgery, while Virginia, growing weaker, insisted on staying with her account. Her skin was pale as wax, but she refused to be examined. "There's no more time for me. I need to make sure you know the truth about my grandson's father. He needs to pay for what he did to my daughter." Hannah realized something was wrong with the lady. Her lips were turning blue, her hands getting colder and colder. Virginia began to speak urgently. "The baby's father. He works at the—" A violent coughing fit interrupted her words. Hannah called for help while holding the trembling lady. The doctors rushed to her aid, but Virginia grabbed Hannah's arm with a surprising force. "Look in the mansion. On Rua Das." Virginia's body suddenly became motionless, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Hannah screamed for help as the doctors tried to revive her, but it was too late. The lady's last words died on her lips, taking with her the secret of the baby's father's identity. "Please don't go yet. I need to know the truth. I need to know who did this to your grandson." The following hours were a whirlwind of emotions. While the baby was being prepared for surgery, Hannah was arranging Mrs. Virginia's funeral. Her heart was divided between gratitude and pain. She gave her life for her grandson's life. How will I tell him about this when he grows up? She wondered. Meanwhile, the doctors were working on the baby's surgery. Hannah went to the hospital chapel, the silver pendant still in her hands. Now she knew that this jewel was the only link between the little one and his true family. A grandmother he will never know, a mother who died to give him life, and a father who prefers to remain in the shadows. After hours of anguish, the surgery was a success. The little baby's heart now beat strong and regular, as if his grandmother's sacrifice had given him a new chance at life. Hannah watched him through the ICU glass, her tears now a mixture of joy and sadness. "You have so much love in your story, my little angel, so much love and so much pain." The next morning, while the baby recovered, Hannah attended Mrs. Virginia's modest funeral. She had no relatives, no one there for her, only the housekeeper she had just met. Virginia promised she would take care of her grandson and keep her promise. I promise I will take care of him with all the love that you and your daughter devoted to him. I will call him Cole." Back at the hospital, Hannah watched little Cole now recovering rapidly. Her little fighter, who had already lost so much in such a short life. She made a silent promise by the crib. "One day, my love, we will discover the whole truth about your story. But for now, you have me, and I have you. That's all we need." Night fell over the hospital as Hannah watched over the baby's peaceful sleep. The silver pendant rested beside the crib, keeping its secrets. Somewhere in the city, a father lived his life unaware that his son had survived, and that a grandmother's sacrifice had changed everyone's destiny. Perhaps it's better this way, my little angel. Some truths hurt too much to be revealed. Day broke when Hannah finally fell asleep in the chair beside the crib. In her dreams, she saw Mrs. Virginia smiling, at peace for having fulfilled her final mission. The baby slept peacefully, his little heart beating strong and regular, like a promise that despite everything, life always finds a way. You are a miracle, my son. A miracle born of the love of two women who gave everything to protect you, and another woman who will also do everything to watch over you. 18 years later, since that stormy night when Hannah found an abandoned baby on the road, time had transformed that helpless little being into Cole, an 18-year-old young man whose eyes carried a premature maturity imposed by life, held the silver pendant. The only connection to his mysterious past remained around his neck as a constant reminder of his unknown origins. Life in the small house on the outskirts was not easy. Hannah, who devoted every moment of the last 18 years to raising Cole, now struggled against a disease that consumed her strength day by day. The thin walls could not contain the sound of her dry cough, which echoed through the house during the early hours of the morning, as she tried unsuccessfully not to wake her son sleeping in the living room. That morning the sun had not yet risen when Cole woke to the sound of Hannah's dry cough. In his makeshift bed in the living room, he remained motionless for a few seconds, his heart tight as he heard the effort his mother made to muffle the sound. The cough worsened every day, and the medicines from the health clinic no longer had any effect. Carefully he got up and went to the kitchen, where he prepared a glass of water and separated the last remaining pills. I need to get more money today. I can't let her run out of medicine again, he thought, worried about his mother's health condition. Mom? Cole called softly, knocking on the small bedroom door. The faint light coming in through the window revealed Hannah sitting on the bed, her pale face marked by fatigue. She tried to smile when her son entered, but another coughing fit prevented her. Cole ran to support her, helping her sit up better. You need to take your medicine now. And I also prepared a tea with those herbs I learned about. They said it helps. My son, Hannah whispered between sips of water, her hands trembling so much that Cole had to hold the glass. You didn't need to wake up so early. You already work too much. Her eyes, though tired, shone with pride as she looked at the young man her abandoned baby had become. Cole adjusted the pillow behind her, trying to make her more comfortable. You're my mother. I would do it all over again 1,000 times to see you better. As he helped Hannah with breakfast, a piece of bread with thin coffee, Cole observed her every movement, noticing how much weaker she was than the day before. The pendant around his neck weighed like lead when he thought about how much money they would need for proper treatment. Hannah noticed his concern and tried to disguise her weakness. Today, I'll finish those sewing jobs for Mrs. Helena. The money will help with the medicine. Not a chance, Cole protested, arranging the blanket over her legs. You're going to rest. I'll collect cans all day long. I'm sure I'll get a lot today. He tried to sound confident, even though he knew the money from the cans barely covered buying food, let alone the expensive medicines the doctor had prescribed. Hannah held his hand, her thin, cold fingers squeezing his. You can't leave school, son. Education is the only thing no one can take away from you. I'll just miss today, Mum. I promise. Cole lied, knowing he hadn't set foot in school for 2 weeks. He couldn't concentrate in class knowing Hannah was home, sick and alone. As he prepared his wooden cart to leave, he heard her coughing again in the room. I'll be back before nightfall. Please rest. Don't even think about turning on that sewing machine today. Hannah waved from the bed, trying to hide the worry in her eyes. Be careful, my son, and don't forget to eat something. Cole stopped at the door, looking at the only person who truly loved him throughout his life. The lump in his throat almost prevented him from responding. You need to eat too. I left some soup on the stove, just heat it up. The streets in the outskirts were coming to life as Cole finally set off, pushing his wooden cart. The sun lazily rose on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange that contrasted with the surrounding poverty. The day promised to be hot, but he didn't mind. Every can found meant a few more cents for Hannah's medicines. His hands, still with fresh calluses from this arduous work, gripped the cart's handle firmly. My mother took care of me when no one else wanted to. Now it's my turn to take care of her, even if I have to spend the night collecting trash, he thought, grateful for the woman who strived so hard to educate him. The sun bore down as Cole rummaged through trash cans and vacant lots. His watchful eyes didn't miss a single can, not a single piece of metal that could be sold. Other, more experienced collectors sometimes helped him, impressed by his dedication. During a break to drink water, sitting on the curb, he held the medallion, as he always did when he needed strength. Whoever my father was, he abandoned me. But Hannah, she chose to love me. At the recycling depot, Cole anxiously awaited the weighing of the collected material. Each kilo was a small victory, but still insufficient to buy all the necessary medicines. Seeing his discouragement, the depot owner slightly increased the value. "I know it's for your mother's medicines, boy. You're a real son, you know. There are many blood sons out there who don't do half of what you do," the man said, handing him the coins of his payment. The way back home was the hardest. Cole stopped in front of the pharmacy, counting the coins dirtied by his work. The pharmacist already knew his story, and sometimes turned a blind eye to sell only half the blister pack of medicines. If I could buy the full treatment, if I could do more. Hannah doesn't deserve to go through this. At home, he found Hannah hunched over the sewing machine. She was trying to finish some pieces for the lady in the neighboring district, but her hands trembled so much she could barely thread the needle. Cole ran to help her, noticing how much paler than normal she looked. "Mom, rest a little. You've worked all day. It's enough." Night fell and Hannah kept sewing, ignoring Cole's protests. Sweat trickled down her forehead as she struggled to finish one more piece. Her breathing was becoming increasingly difficult, but she refused to stop. "I need to finish this today, son. The money from the sewing will help us buy your school supplies." Cole watched helplessly as Hannah battled her own body. He had prepared tea, put a stool for her to rest her feet, but nothing seemed enough. In his mind echoed the words of the doctor at the health clinic. "She needs to rest, needs to eat better, needs medicines that cost more than we earn in a month." The clock struck almost midnight when Hannah started coughing non-stop. Cole ran to fetch water, but when he returned, he realized something was very wrong. Her face was ashen, her hands had dropped the fabric she was sewing. "Son, everything is spinning." Everything happened in slow motion. Hannah tried to get up. Her legs gave way, and before Cole could reach her, she collapsed. The sound of the sewing machine falling mixed with the teenager's desperate scream. "Mom! No! Please! Someone help me!" Despair took over Cole as he held Hannah in his arms. Her body was so light, so frail. Tears blurred his vision as he screamed for help. "I can't lose you too, Mom. You're all I have in this world." Neighbors started arriving, drawn by the screams. Cole didn't want to let Hannah go, but he knew he had to let someone help. His heart raced as he watched the others trying to revive her. "Why can't I do more? Why am I so powerless?" Time seemed frozen as they waited for the ambulance. Cole held Hannah's hand, feeling her weak pulse. The medallion around his neck never felt so heavy. Why does this have to happen? Why does this kind woman have to suffer like this? A lady tried to make Hannah regain consciousness with a damp cloth, while Cole lost himself in dark thoughts. He knew they needed money, a lot of money, to give her proper treatment. "It's my fault. If I could get a better job, something that would give enough money to pay for her medicines if I tried harder," he thought, guilt gnawing at him. The distant sound of the ambulance siren cut through the night as Cole held the unconscious Hannah in his arms. His tears fell on the pale face of the only person who truly loved him. "Hold on tight, Mom. I'll find a way to save you, even if I have to collect cans all day without sleeping. I'll make it," he promised, feeling despair take over. The corridors of the public hospital were crowded. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the aroma of stale coffee from the canteen while people gathered on the uncomfortable plastic benches. Cole gently held Hannah's hand, feeling how thin and frail she was more than ever. In the last few minutes, the fever didn't go down, and the cough had worsened considerably. Hannah tried to hide another coughing fit with a handkerchief, but Cole saw the bloodstains she was trying to hide. "Everything will be all right, Mom. You're strong, you've always been. You raised a son alone, didn't you? This disease is nothing compared to your strength." The doctor's voice calling for Hannah's companion echoed down the hallway. Cole felt his heart tighten. Usually when they called the companion separately, the news wasn't good. A grey-haired nurse approached to stay with Hannah, offering her a glass of water and helping her get more comfortable in the wheelchair. The young man followed the doctor into a small room, his legs trembling with every step. The office was cramped and poorly lit, with an old fan making an annoying noise on the ceiling. The doctor slowly closed the door, as if trying to delay the inevitable. On the wall, recent X-rays showed the relentless progression of the disease. The doctor showed Cole the dark spots taking over Hannah's lungs. His experienced hands trembled slightly as he pointed to the affected areas. "I'm sorry, son, the cancer has spread. There's nothing more we can do but try to keep her comfortable," said the doctor, making Cole feel the world spinning, his hands gripping the edge of the table tightly to keep from falling. "No, doctor, there must be something. I'll do anything. Work 3 jobs, sell everything I have. Please save my mum," he said, his voice choked with despair. The path back seemed like a nightmare in slow motion. Each step through the endless corridors of the hospital made his heart weigh heavier. The sound of his footsteps echoed on the worn linoleum floor, mingling with the typical hospital noises, beeping monitors, distant voices, muffled cries. When he finally reached the wing where Hannah was, he needed to stop for a moment to catch his breath and try to control the tears that insisted on falling. Hannah was sitting on the bed, propped up on pillows worn by use. Even sick, she maintained that dignity that had always characterized her. Her thin face lit up with a faint smile when she saw her son enter, and for a moment, Cole saw in her the same strength of the woman who raised him alone during all those years. He tried to hide the tears, but she knew him too well. "You don't need to hide it, my son. A mother always knows," she said. Overcome with emotion, he knelt beside the bed, resting his head in her lap as he did as a child. "You can't leave me, Mother. I don't know how to live without you." The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster. Cole slept at the hospital, dividing himself between work and caring for Hannah. At night, when she finally fell asleep, he held the silver locket and wondered about his biological parents. Would my father help save my mother? Is there anyone in this world who can help me save her? He wondered. Hannah was getting worse every day, but her concern was always for Cole. One particularly difficult afternoon, she mustered the strength for a conversation she had been putting off. "Son, when I'm gone, I want you to promise that you'll look for your true family. Not out of revenge, but because everyone deserves to know their origins." Cole held her hand tightly. "You are my only family, Mother. You always have been and always will be," he replied. "The lady is the only person I need in my life," Cole whispered, kissing her hand. "Remember what you always told me when the other children asked about my real mother? That true love is a choice, not an obligation." Hannah squeezed his hand, nodding slowly. "And I would choose you, 1,000 times, in 1,000 different lives," he said. A nurse came in to check her vitals, but Hannah didn't let go of her son's hand. "Cole," she continued once they were alone again, "promise me one more thing?" He leaned closer, not wanting her to strain herself, speaking. "Anything, Mom." Hannah took a deep breath, gathering strength. "Promise me you'll be happy, that you won't let bitterness take over your heart." "No, Mom," Cole interrupted her, tears now streaming freely down his face. "Don't talk like that. You're going to get better. You're going to leave here." Hannah raised her trembling hand to wipe the tears from her son's face. "My brave boy, always trying to protect me. Now it's my turn to protect you. Saying goodbye is as hard as leaving." Cole held back his tears, trying to smile for her. "I don't want to say goodbye, Mom. You've been with me all along." Hannah coughed lightly before continuing. "Remember your first day of school? You didn't want to let me go. You said you'd rather stay home helping me with the sewing." Her voice was getting weaker, but she persisted in sharing every precious memory she held. "You cried in secret that day," Cole replied, now letting the tears flow freely. "I saw when I came back from school." Hannah squeezed her son's hand with what little strength she had left. Her gaze was distant, as if she could already see something beyond that hospital room. "Never forget, my son," she whispered, each word taking immense effort. "True love is not in the blood. It's in the choices we make. Love doesn't die." Cole leaned in, kissing her sweaty brow. "I love you, Mom. I can't live without you," he said. The heart monitor began to beep frantically around 3 in the morning. Cole, who had never left Hannah's bedside, saw the exact moment she opened her eyes one last time. "I love you, my son." Those were her last words before the line on the monitor went flat. Cole's scream echoed through the hospital. "Mom, no, please don't leave me." The doctors rushed in to try to revive her, but he knew. Deep in his shattered heart, he knew his mother had left. "Come back, Mom. Please come back. I don't know how to live without you." The hospital procedures seemed a blur. Cole signed papers without even reading them, his tears staining the documents. Cole sat there in the empty hallway, clutching the locket as if it were his last connection to the world. "How will I go on without you, Mom? How will I find my way alone?" The sun rose to find Cole still at the hospital, now completely alone in the world. He gathered Hannah's few belongings into a plastic bag, some clothes, an old photo of the two of them, the rosary she always carried. His hands trembled as he put away each item. "You deserved so much more than this. You deserved a proper funeral, flowers, everything I can't give." However, when he arrived home, he found a yellow envelope tacked to the door. It was an eviction notice, 3 months behind on rent, a 1-week deadline to leave the premises. Cole leaned against the wall, sliding to the floor, the crumpled envelope in his hands. "I can't even mourn my mother in peace." The world shows no mercy for the poor. Hannah's room still held her scent, the unfinished sewing still in the machine, waiting for hands that would never work again. Cole lay on her bed, hugging her pillow, finally allowing all his pain to overflow. "Forgive me, Mom. Forgive me for not being able to save you, for not being the son you deserved." Weeks after Hannah's death, Cole walked the downtown streets, carrying an old backpack with his only belongings on his back. The silver locket, now tarnished by time, still hung around his neck as the only reminder of a distant past. He had lost the house. Now he lived on the streets without a single roof over his head. The cold June wind cut his face as he searched for a place to spend the night. His tired eyes watched the luxurious buildings, and he couldn't help but think, if Hannah were alive, she would suffer so much to see me like this. But life on the streets teaches that dignity has nothing to do with address. He found a spot under the awning of a closed shop. Carefully, he began arranging his few belongings: a thin blanket he'd gotten from a priest, a half-full water bottle, some used clothes. From inside the backpack, he took out a bread he had managed to get from a bakery at the end of the day. He was about to take the first bite when he heard a familiar sound, the muffled cry of hunger he knew all too well. On the other side of the street, a boy not much younger than him was rummaging through a trash can. Cole looked at his bread, then at the boy. "Mom, you always said we only have what we share with others." "Hey, buddy," Cole called, his voice hoarse from little use. The boy startled, ready to run, but something in Cole's gentle smile made him stop. "Come here. There's food here." With slow gestures so as not to scare the boy, Cole broke the bread in half, offering the larger portion. "Eat slowly so it lasts longer. And there's a little water too if you want." The boy took the bread with trembling hands, devouring it as if he hadn't eaten in days. "Why are you helping me?" he asked between bites. Cole touched the medallion, as he always did when thinking of Hannah. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it most." The boy remained there, chewing in silence, while Cole organized the small space that would be his shelter for that night. Carefully, he laid out some newspapers on the floor to insulate a bit from the cold rising through the concrete. His movements were methodical, the result of years living on the streets. "You can sleep here tonight if you want," he offered the boy, who still watched him with distrust. "The nights have been getting colder, and here at least there's a roof." As he spoke, his fingers unconsciously caressed the medallion. Hannah always used to say that no one is so poor that they can't help, nor so rich that they don't need help, he thought. The hours passed slowly as the temperature continued to drop. Cole shared his blanket with the boy, who had finally fallen asleep. The cold wind came in from all sides, making him curl up to try to retain some warmth. His thoughts wandered to the last night in his old home, when the landlord had mercilessly evicted them after Hannah's death. "Life is funny, Mum. You spent years sewing for that man, and he didn't even wait for the funeral to end before throwing us out." The early morning hours advanced when Cole heard shuffling footsteps approaching. An elderly lady, trembling from the cold, was seeking shelter from the plummeting temperature. Her tired eyes reminded him so much of Hannah's in her last days that Cole felt his heart tighten. The lady stopped near them, her thin arms hugging her own body in a futile attempt to warm herself. The biting wind carried the sound of leaves dancing on the asphalt as Cole looked at his blanket, the only protection he had against the merciless cold. The boy beside him stirred, pulling a bit more of the fabric towards himself. The lady coughed, a dry sound that echoed in the empty street, making Cole remember the last nights in the hospital. His fingers gripped the locket tightly. "What would you do, Mom?" "But what a silly question. I know exactly what you would do." Cole rose slowly, trying not to wake the boy. His muscles ached from contact with the hard ground, but he ignored the discomfort. He approached the lady with soft steps, noticing how her hands were purple from the cold. "So you shouldn't be out on the street in this weather," he said gently, his voice reminiscent of the tone Hannah used when advising him. The elderly woman raised her eyes to him, and Cole saw in them the same fear and wounded pride that he carried in his own. "I have nowhere else to go, my son," she replied, her voice trembling from the cold. "My son lost everything to gambling. The house, the job. I ended up here." Her words came out interrupted by the shivers that shook her frail body. Cole felt a lump in his throat. How many stories like that had he heard on the streets? "Come, ma'am. There's room here with us." He guided her to the awning, feeling how she trembled under his light touch. The boy woke up with the movement, instinctively clutching the blanket closer to himself. Cole looked at the two of them, the frightened boy and the trembling lady, and knew there was really no choice to make. "You need to warm up," he said, wrapping the child and the elderly woman in a single blanket, making sure they were both well covered. "But what about you, my son?" the lady asked, her voice choked with emotion at receiving that unexpected act of kindness. Cole smiled, the same sweet smile Hannah said he'd had since he was a baby. "I can handle the cold, Ma'am. I've been through worse." His fingers found the locket again, and he could almost hear his mother's voice saying that true warmth comes from the heart. The wind blew stronger and stronger, making the three of them huddle closer under the awning. Cole leaned against the wall. The lady and the boy, now warmer, began to murmur an old prayer, the same one Hannah used to pray on stormy nights. "You know that prayer?" Cole asked, surprised. She nodded, a small smile appearing on her wrinkled face. "My mother taught me when I was a girl. She said it's the little blessings that keep us alive." The early morning hours advanced, and the cold seemed to penetrate Cole's very bones. His teeth chattered involuntarily, and his fingers were numb, but he refused to show discomfort. He watched the lady, now sleeping more peacefully, wrapped in his blanket with the boy nestled as close as possible to her, instinctively seeking protection. "Is this how you felt, Mum? That tightness in your chest from seeing someone suffering and doing everything to help?" he wondered. Jonathan Henderson observed the city through the mirrored windows of his office on the top floor of the region's largest business building. 18 years had passed since that stormy night, but the memories still haunted him in moments of solitude. His empire had grown exponentially. He now owned half the buildings he saw from that height, but something in his chest ached differently in recent days. It wasn't remorse. He had buried that feeling long ago. It was a sharp physical pain that made him break out in a cold sweat, even in the air-conditioned environment. It must be just stress. "I can't afford to get sick now, not when I'm about to close the biggest deal of my life." The meeting with the shareholders was interrupted when the pain became unbearable. Jonathan tried to maintain his composure, but his hands trembled as he held the million-dollar documents. Sweat poured down his forehead as he tried to focus on the profit spreadsheets in front of him. The numbers began to blur, and his vision became hazy. The last thing he heard before passing out was his own weak, unrecognizable voice. "Someone. Call my private doctor." The private office was as luxurious as his own, but even the expensive furniture couldn't disguise the tension in the air. Dr. Nathan, his physician for over 2 decades, analyzed the tests with an expression Jonathan had never seen before. The silence was broken only by the sound of the air conditioning and the noise of papers being handled. Jonathan adjusted his Italian tie, a nervous gesture he hadn't made in a long time. "I don't have all day, Nathan. What do these tests say?" "Jonathan, we've been friends for years. You know I've always been straight with you." The doctor took off his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. "Your tests show a rare disease, a genetic condition affecting your immune system and heart. It's the same condition that—" He paused, hesitant, before continuing. "It's the same your son had when he was born." Jonathan felt the blood freeze in his veins. It was as if the past was coming to collect its debt. "Don't mention that child. He died 18 years ago, you know that." The doctor stood up, walking to the office window. Outside, the city continued its frantic pace, oblivious to the drama unfolding within. The disease was dormant all these years, but now... He turned to face Jonathan. Now it has advanced aggressively. Your body is rejecting your own organs. We need a bone marrow transplant urgently. The professional tone barely disguised the concern. Without the transplant, you have a maximum of 3 months to live. Jonathan stood up abruptly, his shaky legs betraying his attempt to maintain control. Money is not a problem. Find a donor. Pay whatever it takes. But the doctor shook his head slowly. It's not that simple. Because it's a rare genetic condition, the donor needs to have a very specific compatibility. In fact, he hesitated again. In fact, only a first-degree relative would have real chances of being compatible. The businessman felt the weight of those words like a punch in the stomach. His hands sought support on the marble table as his mind wandered to that rainy night so long ago. No. His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. There must be another way. There is always another way when you have enough money. The doctor approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. This time, Jonathan, not even all your money can buy what you need. A nurse entered with more test results, and every paper the doctor analyzed seemed to bring worse news. Your body is going into collapse, Jonathan. What started in your heart is spreading to other organs. Dr. Nathan pointed to several dark spots in the images. See these dark areas? Those are your failing organs one by one. It's as if your body is self-destructing. Jonathan loosened his tie, feeling suffocated. The walls of the office seemed to close in on him. And if he's not dead? The words escaped before he could contain them. The doctor stopped flipping through the exams, his eyes fixed on Jonathan. What do you mean? The businessman ran his hands over his face, feeling the weight of 3 decades of secrets. That night, I never saw a body. I was never sure. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Nathan methodically organized the papers, as if he needed that moment to process the information. Jonathan, he said finally, if there's even the slightest possibility your son is alive, you need to find him. Not only for your survival, but... Jonathan interrupted him, his voice laden with long repressed emotion. But what? Do you think he would forgive me? That he would agree to help me after what I did? A violent coughing fit prevented the doctor from answering. Jonathan doubled over, and when he pulled his hand away from his mouth, there was blood on his fingers. Dr. Nathan rushed to help him, but the businessman pushed him away. How long? How long do I have to find him? The doctor consulted the exams once more. With the rate the disease is progressing, 3 months maximum, but you need to start treatment immediately to hold on until then. Jonathan stumbled to the window, his reflection in the glass showing a man very different from the powerful businessman everyone knew. His empire, built on lies and abandonment, now seemed as fragile as his health. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky blood red. 18 years. 18 years trying to forget that night. And now my life depends on the very son I abandoned. Dr. Nathan approached with the last results in hand. His expression was grave as he pointed to the numbers highlighted in red. Jonathan, these tests show something even more specific. The compatibility you need is practically impossible to find in anyone other than your son. Your own DNA is turning against you, and only someone with your genetic makeup can reverse that. The doctor's last words echoed in the room as Jonathan stared at the city he had helped build. All his power, all his money, all his connections, none of that mattered now. His life depended on finding the one person in the world who had every reason to wish for his death. How to find a son that I myself made sure to lose. The sun finally set, plunging the office into shadows. Jonathan held the exams with trembling hands, every number, every diagnosis confirming his worst nightmare. The irony of fate could not be crueler. He who abandoned a sick baby to maintain his reputation now depended on that same son to survive. His eyes roamed over the city below, and for the first time in so many years he allowed himself to say out loud, "Where are you, my son? Is there still salvation for a father who doesn't deserve forgiveness?" Days later, Jonathan adjusted the IV drip of the medication now regulating his heartbeat, his hands trembling slightly with the effort. The luxurious office, which once represented all his power, now felt suffocating with its mahogany walls and expensive paintings. At the conference table in front of him, 3 private investigators awaited his instructions. while he tried to control his increasingly difficult breathing. His eyes scanned the men, evaluating if he could trust them with his darkest secret. "I need you to find someone. And no one, absolutely no one, can know about this search." 18 years ago, Jonathan began, his voice weaker than he would have liked, "I abandoned a baby on a road during a storm." The words came out like venom from his mouth as the investigators took notes. "It was a March night near the Old State Road. The baby—" He stopped, a coughing fit interrupting his speech. When he recovered, he continued, "The baby was wearing a silver locket. It's the only concrete thing I have to help in the search." The more experienced investigator frowned, analyzing the scant information provided. "Mr. Henderson, without official records, without the mother's name, without—" Jonathan slammed his hand on the table, his frustration mingled with despair. "Don't tell me what we don't have. Tell me how we're going to find him. There must be a way. There's always a way when you have enough money." With shaking hands, Jonathan opened a drawer of his desk and took out a small drawing of the locket he had made from memory. It was of old silver, with an engraving of Our Lady. It had a small mark on the back, like a diagonal scratch. His voice failed as he recalled the moment he decided not to tear the jewel from the baby's neck. "It was the only thing I left with him, the only clue to his origin." "Let's start with the hospitals in the region," suggested one of the investigators, spreading a map over the table. "If someone found the baby that night, they must have sought medical attention." Jonathan felt a pang in his chest at the thought of the baby alone in the rain. His fingers tightened around the bottle of medicine. "He was sick when I abandoned him. He had a heart problem, the same one that's killing me now." The third investigator, who had remained silent until then, stood up to examine the map more closely. "The Old State Highway passed through 3 main neighborhoods. We can survey all children registered at that time, all adoptions." A heavy silence fell over the room as the investigators exchanged worried glances. The search would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. No documents, no records, only Jonathan's hazy memories of a night he had spent 18 years trying to forget. The businessman wiped the cold sweat from his brow. "Don't look at me like that. I don't need your judgment. I need results." "The baby's mother," the first investigator resumed, trying a new approach. "Who was she?" "Family, friends, someone who might have clues." Jonathan closed his eyes, the image of Lillian appearing in his mind for the first time in years. She was a maid, Lillian. She died in childbirth at the Central Public Hospital. But she had a mother. She must know something. She came looking for me about her grandson, and I told her what I did, and we never saw each other again. If there's anyone who might have news, it's her. But we haven't been in contact for many years. I don't know if she was still alive. The investigators began to outline strategies, but Jonathan could barely concentrate. The pain in his chest was increasing, and his vision was starting to blur around the edges. Still, he forced himself to continue. "I want teams in all neighborhoods near that road. Go door to door if necessary. This medallion—" Someone must have seen that baby with the medallion somewhere. The afternoon sun streamed through the office windows, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. Jonathan watched the movement of the city below, feeling more and more distant from it all. 18 years and 18 years trying to forget, and now every minute lost could cost me my life. His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. What cruel irony is this? Suddenly the pain exploded in his chest like a bomb. Jonathan staggered, knocking over the water jug onto the scattered documents on the table. His vision went completely dark for a few seconds, and he felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The investigators rushed to support him, but he was already collapsing. "My son. I need to find my son." "I'm fine." Jonathan pushed away the investigator's hands, trying to support him, his pride still stronger than the stabbing pain in his chest. He straightened his crumpled Italian suit and ran a hand through his graying hair, trying to regain his composure. Despite his pale face and the cold sweat running down his brow, he forced himself to stand, leaning discreetly on the table. "We don't need any more interruptions. Focus on finding my son. That's all that matters," he determined, his voice as firm as he could muster. The investigators exchanged worried glances as Jonathan stumbled towards the door. "Mr. Henderson, you're not in any condition to—" But he cut them off with a brusque gesture, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. "I said I'm fine. I need some fresh air, that's all. Keep working and keep me informed of any progress." He finished, leaving the room without waiting for a response. The panoramic elevator descended slowly down the 40 floors of the building, and Jonathan watched his reflection in the mirrored glass. The image he saw barely resembled the powerful businessman he once was. His face was gaunt, dark circles marked his eyes, and his hands wouldn't stop trembling. A sharper pang in his chest made him double over, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. "I can't show weakness, not now that I'm so close to finding a solution." The afternoon air was heavy when Jonathan exited the building, ignoring the greetings of the security guards. His steps were unsteady as he walked along the busy sidewalk, the world around him starting to spin. People rushed past, some casting curious glances at the well-dressed man who looked about to collapse. He loosened his tie, feeling suffocated. Just need to reach the car. Just a few more meters. That's when it happened. The pain exploded in his chest like 1,000 needles, making his knees buckle. The world went dark for a moment, and Jonathan felt his body too heavy to remain standing. Before he hit the ground, however, strong arms caught him. Through the fog of pain, he heard a young, concerned voice. "Hey, mister, hang in there. Somebody call an ambulance," said Cole. Jonathan struggled to keep his eyes open, trying to focus on the face of his savior. It was a young homeless man, his worn and dirty clothes contrasting with the elegance of the business avenue. But there was something familiar about that face, something in the young man's eyes that made his heart skip a beat. Even through the scruff and grime, Jonathan recognized his own eyes staring back at him. It can't be, he thought. Cole held the unknown man firmly, ignoring the looks of disdain from passers-by. The silver medallion around his neck swayed as he tried to keep the stranger conscious. "Stay with me, sir. Somebody call an ambulance," he yelled at the people beginning to gather around. His calloused, street-worn hands cradled the man's head, who looked at him with an expression of shock and recognition. "Your eyes. How?" Jonathan said, before passing out. The sound of the siren cut through the afternoon air, but Jonathan was already losing consciousness. His last few strengths were used to raise his trembling hand towards Cole's face, as if he wanted to touch him to make sure he was real. But before he could say anything, the darkness enveloped him completely. My... The paramedics worked quickly, putting Jonathan into the ambulance while checking his vital signs. Cole remained nearby, still holding the folder of documents the man had dropped. "Do you know him?" one of the rescuers asked. Cole shook his head. "No, but there's something strange. When he looked at me, it was like he'd seen a ghost." "We need to take him now," the paramedic said, preparing to close the ambulance doors. Cole took a step back, but something prevented him from just leaving. Maybe it was that man's look, or maybe it was Hannah's voice echoing in his memory, reminding him to always help those in need. Can I go with him? He doesn't seem to have anyone with him right now," he said, and the paramedics agreed. At the hospital, the doctors raced against time. Jonathan's condition was critical, and they urgently needed blood. Cole waited in the hallway, still trying to understand why he felt so connected to a complete stranger. A nurse approached, looking worried. "Are you related to him?" Cole shook his head. "No, I was just passing by at the time." "Why?" The nurse consulted a clipboard, her expression grave. "Mister, Jonathan, he needs an urgent blood transfusion, but he has a very rare blood type. We're having trouble finding compatible donors," she explained. Cole unconsciously touched the medallion around his neck, that familiar gesture he always made when he needed to make an important decision. "I can see if I can donate. I don't know my blood type, haven't had tests done in a long time, but if I can help," he said. The hospital corridors reminded Cole so much of the last night with Hannah that he felt a lump in his throat. As he followed the nurse to do the compatibility tests, he couldn't get that man's look out of his head, a look that, for some inexplicable reason, seemed like a mirror of his own eyes. Why do I feel like I've seen those eyes before? Why does it seem like I know that man from somewhere? He thought. "We're going to do the compatibility tests now," the nurse said, preparing the necessary materials. Cole rolled up the sleeve of his worn shirt, exposing his arm for the blood draw. The silver medallion shone under the fluorescent hospital lights, as if it wanted to reveal its secrets. "May God's will be done. If I can help this man, I'll help him." That's what Hannah taught me. The ICU waiting room was quiet when the doctor appeared with the test results in hand. Cole rose from the plastic chair, his body tense with anxiety. Through the glass, he could see Jonathan connected to various machines, his breathing maintained by machines. The doctor looked back and forth between the papers and Cole, an expression of amazement on his face. "It's incredible. Not only is your blood compatible, but the tests show an almost perfect genetic compatibility. It's like..." He stopped, re-evaluating his words. "It's extraordinarily rare to find that level of compatibility between unrelated people." "What do you mean, genetic compatibility?" Cole asked, his heart racing for reasons he didn't understand. The doctor adjusted his glasses, still studying the results. "Mr. Henderson urgently needs a bone marrow transplant. And you're the perfect donor. It's extremely rare to find that level of compatibility." The doctor paused, his eyes noticing Cole's medallion around his neck, but he said nothing. Jonathan's cardiac monitors began to show changes when Cole entered the ICU. Even sedated, the businessman seemed to react to the young man's presence. The doctor checked his vital signs while Cole approached the bed, his eyes fixed on the pale face of the man he had saved on the street. There was something familiar about those features, something he couldn't explain. "Why do I feel like I've seen this face before?" Jonathan slowly opened his eyes, consciousness returning in confused waves. His vision was blurry, but as he focused on the young man beside his bed, something in his gaze changed. It was the same young man who had rescued him on the street, but now under the harsh light of the ICU, there was something more, something that made his heart skip a beat. Those eyes. It can't be. Jonathan tried to sit up in bed, his movements limited by the tubes and wires. His eyes didn't leave Cole's face, as if trying to confirm something his mind refused to believe. Then, the millionaire saw the medallion the young man was holding. The heart monitor began to beep faster, reflecting his growing agitation. The doctor approached, concerned. "Mr. Henderson, you need to calm down. Your heart can't take any more changes." "That medallion," Jonathan whispered, his voice hoarse and weak. His trembling hand pointed at the silver piece hanging from Cole's neck. Where did you get it?" The words came out with difficulty, each breath seeming to cost him an immense effort. Cole instinctively grasped the medallion. "It's always been with me. It's the only thing I have from my past." Jonathan's face paled even more, if that was possible. His eyes filled with tears as he studied every detail of the young man's face. An old memory tried to emerge in his mind, a stormy night he had spent years trying to forget. The medallion shone under the fluorescent light, like a silent accusation. You look like..." "Who?" Cole asked, feeling an inexplicable chill run down his spine. There was something about the way Jonathan looked at him, something that made his heart beat faster. The businessman opened his mouth to answer, but a sharp pain in his chest made him cringe. "I need to tell you. There's something you need to know." The heart monitor began to emit more intense alerts. The doctor moved quickly, checking the increasingly unstable vital signs. Jonathan gripped Cole's arm with a surprising strength for someone so debilitated. That night, the storm. His voice was growing weaker, punctuated by labored breathing. "What night? What are you talking about?" Cole leaned in closer, an inexplicable anxiety gripping his chest. There was an urgency in Jonathan's eyes, as if he knew his time was running out. Lillian, she was so... But before he could continue, his body arched on the bed, seized by searing pain. The high-pitched and continuous sound of the heart monitor filled the room. Jonathan still tried to speak, his lips moving without making a sound, his eyes fixed on Cole with an expression of despair and regret. His body convulsed one last time before falling motionless on the white sheets. "Code Blue!" the doctor shouted, initiating resuscitation maneuvers. The emergency team invaded the room, pushing Cole aside. He watched, dazed, as they tried to revive Jonathan. The name the businessman had mentioned, Lillian, echoed in his mind like an unanswered question. It was his mother's name. Chaos took over the ICU room. Cole watched, paralyzed at the door, as the medical team fought to bring Jonathan back. The sound of the defibrillator echoed through the room, followed by the dull thud of the body against the bed. A nurse shouted the vital signs, her voice mixing with the constant beeping of the machines. In the confusion, Jonathan's wallet fell from the coat that was hanging near the bed. "Come on, react. One more time," the doctor ordered, his hands still pressing the businessman's chest. The defibrillator buzzed once more, sending another electric shock through Jonathan's lifeless body. The doctor pressed his chest hard, beads of sweat running down his forehead as he struggled to bring him back. Cole remained paralyzed at the door, his fingers instinctively gripping the medallion around his neck as he watched the medical team work frantically. The heart monitor continued to emit its high-pitched and continuous sound, like a scream of despair echoing through the ICU. For a moment, everything seemed lost, until a small irregular beep appeared on the screen, followed by another and another. "We have a pulse, weak but stable. Quick, we need to stabilize him before we have another arrest," the doctor shouted, his hands still working with precision. "Why is my heart so tight seeing this man fighting for his life? Why do I feel like a part of me is on that bed?" Cole thought, feeling an inexplicable connection with that stranger. Jonathan's wallet had fallen to the floor with the rush of the nurses, partially open, revealing a small metallic glint that caught Cole's eye. As the medical team focused on stabilizing the businessman's vital signs, the young man slowly approached and picked up the object. His hands were trembling when he saw a photo of a woman in Jonathan's wallet. She was wearing a medallion identical to Cole's, just less worn by time. The same Our Lady engraved in silver, the same diagonal scratch on the back. It was like looking into a mirror of the past. "It can't be. After all these years, searching for answers," Cole muttered, his voice choked. "How can someone have a photo with my medallion? Could this woman in the photo? Could he?" he asked himself, feeling his world spinning. The doctors finally managed to stabilize Jonathan, connecting him to a respirator and adjusting the medication that now ran through his veins through multiple tubes. Dr. Nathan, still catching his breath after the effort to revive his patient, watched Cole with an intrigued expression. The young man was still holding the photo, as if trying to understand the meaning of that discovery. The doctor approached slowly, his years of experience allowing him to put the pieces of that puzzle together. Those eyes, they're the same, and now the test results make complete sense, the doctor thought before speaking. "Cole, I need to talk to you about something important, something that will change everything you know about your life." The ICU conference room seemed too small to contain the weight of the revelations that were to come. Cole sat stiffly in the chair, the two medallions now side by side on the table between him and Dr. Nathan. The doctor held the compatibility test results, his expression grave as he organized the words that could forever change that young man's life. The silence was broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of the ICU monitors. "Cole, I've been Jonathan's doctor for years. I need to know if you've ever wondered why your tests showed such a perfect match with Mr. Henderson?" The doctor began cautiously. "Doctor, please don't prolong this agony any longer." "What are you trying to tell me?" Cole replied, his voice trembling. Dr. Nathan slid the tests across the table, pointing to a series of numbers and graphs that didn't make much sense to Cole. However, the doctor's words hit him like a bolt of lightning. The genetic compatibility between him and Jonathan was too high to be a coincidence. The genetic material, the specific markers, everything indicated a first-degree relationship. The doctor explained how it was practically impossible to find this level of compatibility between people without a direct blood relationship. "Cole, these results can only mean one thing. Jonathan Henderson is your biological father," the doctor finally revealed. "How is this possible? How can fate be so ironic as to make me save the life of the man who abandoned me?" Cole questioned, his voice choked with emotion. Cole's hands were trembling. He remembered the story Hannah had told him so many times about the night she found him began to take on new contours. The storm, the expensive car leaving the road, the abandoned baby with a silver medallion, all the pieces fit into a puzzle too painful to contemplate. Dr. Nathan watched in silence, giving the young man time to process the magnitude of that revelation. "So it was him. It was him who left me to die that night," Cole said, his voice laced with a mixture of pain and anger. "And now his life is in my hands, just as mine was in his 18 years ago," he added, feeling the weight of that irony. The ICU monitors continued their constant beeping, marking Jonathan's weak but stable heartbeats. Cole returned to the room, slowly approaching the bed where his biological father fought for his life. The man who just hours ago was a stranger now represented the missing link in his story, the answer to questions that had tormented him his entire life. The machines kept Jonathan alive, but only a bone marrow transplant could save him, a transplant that only Cole could perform. Look how capricious fate is. The son you tried to discard is your only chance of survival. Cole murmured to his unconscious father. But how can I save someone who did not hesitate to condemn me to death, he thought, feeling his heart divided. Dr. Nathan entered the room again, carrying more test results. The news was not good. Jonathan's condition was worsening by the hour, and without the transplant, his chances were practically nil. The doctor explained the procedure, the risks, the recovery time in detail, but his words sounded distant to Cole, who could not take his eyes off the man in the bed. The image of Hannah, his true mother, appeared in his mind, reminding him of all the lessons about forgiveness and compassion she had taught him. The decision is yours, Cole. I cannot and should not influence your choice, the doctor said, placing his hand on his shoulder. How can I decide between the revenge my heart demands and the compassion Hannah taught me? Cole replied, his voice choked. The hours dragged on as Cole struggled with his decision. Sitting by Jonathan's bedside, he mentally replayed every moment of his life, the struggles, the battles, Hannah's unconditional love, who saved and raised him even though she had nothing. The contrast between the poverty he lived in and the luxury surrounding his biological father was like a slap in the face. The medallion around his neck seemed to weigh a ton, loaded with memories and meanings he never imagined. Why did you do this to me? What kind of man abandons a sick baby on a stormy night? Cole asked his unconscious father. Is there forgiveness great enough to cover such a cruel abandonment? He thought, as he watched the machines keeping Jonathan alive. Cole rose from the chair beside Jonathan's bed, his steps echoing through the empty hospital corridors as he searched for a place to organize his thoughts. His feet instinctively led him to the small chapel on the third floor, a silent space lit only by a few flickering candles. The soft scent of incense filled the air, as familiar as the Sunday afternoons when he accompanied Hannah to the neighborhood church. The young man sat on the last pew, his fingers still unconsciously caressing the medallion that now carried a much heavier weight than mere silver. "Mum, you always said God doesn't give us burdens greater than we can bear," he whispered into the silence of the chapel. "But this one, Mum, this one seems too heavy," he finished, feeling the tears start to form. The candles danced on the chapel walls, casting shadows that seemed to move to the rhythm of the memories flooding Cole's mind. He remembered one particularly difficult night when he was only 10 years old and had discovered he was adopted. Hannah found him crying hidden under the bed, and instead of empty words of comfort, she shared with him a lesson that now echoed with renewed strength in his heart. His hands gripped the worn wooden pew as her voice resurfaced in his memory. "Son, forgiveness is not a gift we give to others. It's a gift we give ourselves." Her words that night came back now, more meaningful than ever. "How could you be so wise, Mum? How did you know that one day I would need these lessons so much?" he asked the chapel's silence. The crucifix on the wall seemed to watch him with the same intensity that Hannah used to when she knew he was struggling with a difficult decision. Cole stood up, approaching the altar with hesitant steps. A nearly extinguished candle caught his attention. It was about to go out, but still struggling to keep its flame lit, just as Jonathan was fighting for his life a few floors above. His hands trembled as he lit a new candle, remembering how many times he had seen Hannah make the same gesture, always accompanied by a prayer for others, even for those who had hurt her. "You lit so many candles for me, Mum. You prayed so much for the man who abandoned me, without even knowing who he was," Cole murmured, watching the new flame grow. "Did you already know that one day I would need to learn to forgive something so great?" A sudden shudder ran through his body when the chapel door opened, revealing Dr. Nathan's hurried figure. The doctor seemed to have run there, his words coming out broken by his panting breath. Jonathan's condition had significantly worsened in the last few minutes. They needed an immediate answer about the transplant. The air in the chapel seemed to thicken, each second weighing like lead as the doctor explained the urgency of the situation. "Cole, we need your decision now. His organs are starting to fail," the doctor said, his voice heavy with concern. How can I decide in minutes something that will change 2 lives forever? Cole replied, his heart racing. Dr. Nathan hesitated before continuing, his next words falling like stones in the silence of the chapel. The procedure will not be simple. The heart problem you had as a baby, the same one that almost killed you that stormy night, may complicate the surgery. The doctor carefully explained the risks, each word weighing more than the previous one. The anesthesia, the procedure itself, everything carried an additional risk for someone with his condition. There is a chance you may not survive the procedure, the doctor concluded, his voice almost a whisper. The candles continued their silent dance as Cole absorbed the weight of that revelation. The risk was not just failing to save Jonathan, it was losing his own life in the process. His eyes met the small image of Our Lady on the altar, so similar to the one engraved on his medallion, and for a moment he saw himself again as that abandoned baby in the rain, struggling to survive. Hannah's voice emerged once more in his memory, this time from one of the last moments they shared. True strength lies not in how much life hurts us, son, but in how we choose to react to the pain. Her words now echoed with crystal clarity. What would you do, Mother? Would you risk your life to save someone who tried to take yours? He asked the silence. A commotion in the hallway caught both their attention. More doctors running, raised voices discussing emergency procedures. Dr. Nathan quickly checked his phone, his face paling with the message received. Jonathan had gone into multiple organ failure. Time was running out. We need your answer now, Cole. In the next few minutes, we either start the procedure or... The doctor didn't complete the sentence, but the meaning was clear. It was at that moment that Cole felt something different, a peace that did not come from a logical decision, but from a much deeper place. Hannah's words about forgiveness, about choosing love even when it would be easier to choose hate, now seemed truer than ever. His eyes fixed on the last candle he had lit, its flame now strong and steady, as if pointing the way forward. For you know, Doctor, my mother, my real mother, always said that our choices define who we are, he began, his voice finding a strength he didn't know he had. And today, I choose to be her son, not the son of the man who abandoned me. Dr. Nathan observed in silence as Cole rose, a new determination in his movements. The young man who had entered the chapel hours before, burdened with doubts and sorrows, now seemed different, as if he had found an answer greater than his own pains. I'll go through with the procedure, Doctor. Not for the man who abandoned me, but for the woman who taught me the true meaning of love, Cole declared, his voice firm despite the fear he still felt. Even knowing the risks to your own life, the doctor questioned, needing to be sure. The candles in the chapel cast one last glow over Cole's face as he headed for the door, ready to face what fate had prepared. His heart was beating strongly, not with fear, but with a certainty that came from years of teachings about love and forgiveness. Hannah might no longer be there physically, but her lessons were alive in every decision he made. Yes, Doctor. Even knowing the risks, he replied, touching the medallion one last time, because sometimes we need to risk everything to prove we're better than our scars. The path to the surgical center seemed more a dream than reality. Each step echoed through the hospital corridors as the medical team hurried to prepare for the procedure. Cole could feel the respectful gaze of the professionals who knew his story, the abandoned son choosing to risk his own life to save the father who rejected him. An older nurse, as she helped him get ready, couldn't hold back her tears. You're a very special boy, you know, she said, adjusting the sheet on the gurney. No, I just had a mother who taught me the value of compassion, he replied, thinking of Hannah. The surgical center was in complete silence when the medical team began the procedure. Bright lights illuminated 2 operating tables, father and son separated only by a blue lilac curtain. Dr. Nathan commanded the extraction of Cole's bone marrow, his precise movements masking the tension he felt. The heart monitors of both patients marked a steady rhythm, almost synchronized, as if even unconscious their hearts beat in one last attempt at connection. Between the sound of the equipment and the whispered orders, a nurse noticed the first change in Cole's vital signs. Doctor, the boy's saturation is dropping, she warned, her eyes fixed on the monitor. Keep him stable. We can't lose either of them now, the doctor replied, feeling the weight of that responsibility. The minutes dragged on as the team worked in perfect synchrony, each movement calculated with millimetric precision. The bone marrow extraction was nearly complete when the first real sign of trouble arose. Cole's heart began experiencing severe arrhythmias, exactly as Dr. Nathan had feared. The monitors emitted shrill alerts, breaking the team's concentration. The young man's body was reacting to the procedure in a way no one had foreseen, his pre-existing heart condition further complicating the situation. "Blood pressure is dropping. We need epinephrine now," one of the surgeons shouted. "This shouldn't be happening, not yet," thought Dr. Nathan, his hands moving quickly. Chaos erupted in the surgical center as Cole's vital signs began to rapidly deteriorate. Machines beeped in a desperate symphony as the medical team struggled to stabilize the young man without interrupting the crucial procedure. On the other side of the curtain, Jonathan remained stable, oblivious to the complications threatening his son's life. A nurse ran between the two tables, carrying bags of medication and emergency equipment. "He's going into shock," the anesthetist warned, his voice tense. "If we don't reverse this now, we're going to lose him," he added, quickly adjusting the dosage of the medications. Dr. Nathan found himself facing a dilemma that no medical school could have prepared him for. The bone marrow extracted from Cole was Jonathan's only chance of survival, but continuing the procedure could cost the young man his life. The machines continued their chorus of alerts, each beep a reminder that time was running out for a decision. Sweat trickled down the doctor's mask as he weighed his options, years of experience seeming insufficient in that crucial moment. "Doctor, we need a decision now," the team's cardiologist insisted. "How do you choose between two lives when both depend on each other?" Dr. Nathan thought, his hands frozen in the air. The complications increased with every second. Cole's heart struggled to maintain its rhythm, each irregular beat more worrying than the last. The team divided between continuing the extraction and trying to stabilize his vital signs, a battle that seemed impossible to win on two fronts. The surgical center's lights reflected off the young man's pale face, highlighting a serenity that contrasted with the chaos around him. "We're losing him. I need to increase the medication dose," a nurse shouted. "If we increase it anymore, his heart won't take it," the anesthetist replied, the fear evident in his voice. Cole's heart monitor emitted a different, higher and continuous sound. His heart was stopping. The team moved instantly, initiating emergency procedures while trying to keep the extraction going. Dr. Nathan watched the numbers on the monitors plummet, knowing that every second of indecision could be fatal. The extracted bone marrow waited to be transferred, time working against its viability. "If we stop now, Jonathan dies. If we continue, we could lose Cole," one of the surgeons voiced the dilemma. "How do you make a choice when there is no right choice?" Dr. Nathan replied, his words getting lost in the sound of the machines. An even more urgent alarm sounded when Cole's heart stopped completely. Dr. Nathan's experienced hands immediately initiated cardiac massage, while another part of the team prepared the defibrillator. The sound of the rhythmic compressions mixed with the tense commands of the doctors, creating an atmosphere of controlled despair. On the other side of the curtain, ironically, Jonathan's vital signs remained stable, oblivious to the unfolding drama. "Charge! Clear!" the doctor ordered. "Please don't make us choose," he murmured as the defibrillator paddles touched Cole's chest. Cole's body arched with the shock, but his heart refused to resume a normal rhythm. Every second that passed diminished the chances of success on both sides of the curtain. The extracted marrow had a limited viability time, and Cole's brain could not remain without oxygenation for much longer. The team worked frantically, divided between two procedures that seemed increasingly incompatible. "One more time, Charge," Dr. Nathan commanded. "How can fate be so cruel as to force us into this decision?" he thought, watching the still flat line on the monitor. Time seemed frozen in the surgical center, each second stretching into an eternity of impossible decisions. The medical team moved in slow motion, each action carrying the weight of its consequences. Dr. Nathan looked back and forth between the two patients, father and son, united by blood but separated by a history of abandonment, now connected in a moment that would decide the fate of both. "Doctor, the marrow." "Time is running out," alerted a surgeon. "And Cole's brain response time too," another completed, the despair evident in his voice. The sound of Cole's heart monitor remained a continuous, high-pitched tone as the resuscitation attempts continued. The medical team took turns with the compressions, their movements becoming more and more urgent as the minutes ticked by. Dr. Nathan felt the weight of every second, knowing he needed to make a decision that would irrevocably change the course of 2 lives. The extracted marrow waited, its viability time draining like sand in an invisible hourglass. "How long until the marrow is no longer viable?" he asked, his hands still working on Cole's chest. "Minutes, doctor, just minutes," the specialist replied, his voice laden with concern. The machines continued their desperate symphony, each sound and alarm marking the time slipping away. The medical team moved between the 2 operating tables, their gazes alternating between father and son, as Dr. Nathan felt the weight of the most difficult decision of his career. Jonathan's life depended on the already extracted marrow, but continuing the procedure would mean abandoning the attempts to resuscitate Cole. "We need a decision now, doctor," the surgeon in charge of the transfer insisted. How to choose between saving the father who abandoned or the son who came to forgive? Dr. Nathan thought, his hands trembling for the first time in years of surgery. The surgical center had transformed into a battlefield where every second was precious. On one side, the extracted marrow waited to be transferred, its viability diminishing with each passing moment. On the other, Cole's body remained inert, his heart silent despite all attempts at resuscitation. Dr. Nathan looked at his team, seeing in their eyes the same moral dilemma that consumed him. The choice before them was not just medical, it was profoundly human. "We need to decide now, both are at their limit," the anesthetist warned. "Sometimes there are no right choices, only necessary choices," Dr. Nathan replied, preparing to make the most difficult decision of his life. The seconds seemed eternal as Dr. Nathan weighed his options. Each tick of the clock on the wall sounded like a hammer, marking the time running out for both patients. The team awaited his orders, the air heavy with the tension of the moment. The doctor took one last look at the 2 men, the father seeking redemption and the son who chose forgiveness, knowing his next order would irreversibly change the fate of both. "Doctor, we need your final decision now," said the assistant surgeon, his voice almost a whisper. "May God forgive me for what I'm about to do," thought Dr. Nathan, preparing to give the order that would seal the fate of father and son. The clock on the wall showed it was already early morning when Dr. Nathan opened his mouth to give his final order. The sound of the machines seemed to have diminished, as if even they respected the gravity of that moment. The entire team waited, paralyzed, knowing that the doctor's next words would determine which life would be saved and which would be lost. "Team," Dr. Nathan began, his voice choked with contained emotion. "We're going to—" But before he could complete his order, a new sound cut through the air of the surgical center, making everyone hold their breath. The first light of dawn filtered through the hospital room blinds as Jonathan began to awaken, his heavy eyes struggling against the invasive brightness. The sterile and silent environment was broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitors and the soft sound of oxygen flowing through the cannula in his nose. His limbs felt heavy, as if he had slept for days, and his throat was dry as paper. A nurse noticed his movements and quickly called Dr. Nathan, who entered the room with an expression that mixed relief and concern. "Welcome back, Mr. Henderson. You gave us quite a scare," the doctor said, checking his vital signs. How long?" Jonathan managed to whisper, his voice hoarse from disuse. Dr. Nathan adjusted the bed to a more elevated position, allowing Jonathan to sit with more comfort. The businessman tried to organize his hazy thoughts, fragments of memory slowly returning, the discovery of his illness, the despair of finding a donor, and then Cole. His heart raced as he remembered his son, causing the monitors to react instantly. The doctor noticed his agitation and placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him. "The transplant was successful, Jonathan. Your body is responding positively to the marrow," the doctor explained, pausing significantly. "But there's something you need to know about your son," the doctor began, his tone shifting to something more somber. "My son." "What happened to my son?" Jonathan asked, feeling a fear he had never experienced before. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity as Dr. Nathan organized his words. The doctor pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed, his face revealing the weight of what he was about to share. Carefully, he began to explain how Cole had to be resuscitated 3 times during the procedure, his heart stopping repeatedly due to the heart condition he had carried since infancy. With each word from the doctor, Jonathan felt as if an invisible fist was tightening around his chest. He knew the risks, Jonathan. He knew he might not survive, but he insisted on going through with it, the doctor revealed, his voice choked. "How chose to risk his own life to save mine?" Jonathan asked, tears beginning to form in his eyes. Dr. Nathan continued his account, describing how even after the first cardiac arrest, Cole had left explicit instructions for the procedure to continue, no matter what happened to him. Jonathan's heart monitor recorded his growing agitation as he listened about the sacrifice of the son he had abandoned. Each irregular beat was a painful reminder of the price Cole was paying for his choice. "The 3rd time his heart stopped, I thought we had lost him for good," the doctor confessed, running his hand over his tired face. But he kept fighting, just like he fought on that stormy night 18 years ago. The weight of guilt hit Jonathan like an avalanche when the doctor mentioned the night of abandonment. His hands trembled as he gripped the hospital sheet, dark stains forming where his tears fell. Dr. Nathan watched in silence as the powerful businessman came undone before the magnitude of his son's sacrifice. "He told me something before the surgery," the doctor continued softly. "He said he wasn't doing this for the father who abandoned him, but for the mother who taught him the value of forgiveness," the doctor said, making Jonathan gasp. "How can he be so different from me? How can he have such goodness after everything I did?" Jonathan asked, more to himself than to the doctor. The following hours were a whirlwind of tests and checkups, but Jonathan's mind was distant, lost between remorse for the past and fear for the future. The doctors explained about his recovery, about the care needed, but all he could think about was the son who once again fought for his life because of him. Dr. Nathan sensed his anguish and tried to offer words of comfort, even though he knew nothing could alleviate that kind of pain. "He's strong, Jonathan. He survived the abandonment, survived the streets," the doctor said softly. "But will he survive my redemption?" Jonathan replied, his voice broken by emotion. Night began to fall when Jonathan finally found the strength to ask the question he feared most. His voice trembled as he inquired about Cole's current state, and Dr. Nathan's silence before answering made his heart tighten in a way no illness had managed. Carefully, the doctor explained that after the last resuscitation, Cole had not regained consciousness. "He's in a coma, Jonathan," the doctor finally revealed. The strain of the procedure, combined with his heart condition. The words felt like knives in the businessman's chest. "And I'm responsible for all of it," Jonathan stated, the weight of his past choices never more evident. In the twilight of the room, Jonathan watched the city through the hospital window, the lights beginning to come on one by one like artificial stars. His empire was out there, all those buildings and companies he built at the cost of his humanity. Now none of that mattered. His son, the baby he had abandoned on a stormy night, had grown into a better man than he had ever been. "Can I see him?" he asked Dr. Nathan, who still remained in the room. "Tomorrow, when you're stronger." "But I need you to understand, he may not wake up," the doctor replied, the cruel truth weighing in every word. The heart monitor continued its steady beep, marking the beats of the heart that now carried the marrow of his son. Jonathan felt each beat as an accusation, each pulse reminding him of Cole's sacrifice. Dr. Nathan prepared to leave when the businessman called him one last time, his voice laden with an emotion he had never allowed others to see. "Doctor, tell me the truth. Does he have a chance?" Jonathan asked, clinging to any thread of hope. "Medicine has its limits, Jonathan. Now all we can do is wait and pray," the doctor answered, leaving the room in silence except for the relentless sound of the monitor, reminding Jonathan that his heart kept beating at the cost of his son's sacrifice. Days later, as soon as the doctor cleared him for a visit, Jonathan's footsteps echoed through the silent hospital corridors as he approached the ICU where Cole was admitted. His movements were slow, still recovering from the surgery, but each step was driven by an urgency that overrode any physical discomfort. Dr. Nathan walked by his side, monitoring his vital signs and ready to intervene if necessary. When they finally reached the door to the room, Jonathan stopped, his heart, now functioning thanks to his son's marrow, beating erratically. Through the glass, he could see the young man lying motionless, connected to various machines. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" the doctor asked, concerned. "I'm not ready, doctor, but he's waited 18 years for this moment," Jonathan replied, his voice choked. The sound of the machines filled the room as Jonathan entered. His legs trembled as he approached the bed, each step seeming harder than the last. Cole was pale, his breathing maintained by machines, but there was a serenity on his face that reminded Jonathan of Hannah. He sat in the chair beside the bed, his hands hesitating before touching his son's hand for the first time in 18 years. The physical contact seemed to send an electric current through his body, and the tears he had been trying to hold back began to flow freely. "Son, please wake up. Your father is here now," he whispered, his voice shaking. "And I promise I will redeem myself for all my mistakes as long as I still live. I will never abandon you again," he finished, gently squeezing Cole's hand. As if responding to his father's touch, the monitors began registering changes in Cole's vital signs. His fingers moved slightly under Jonathan's hand, and his eyelids fluttered. The businessman stood up abruptly, barely able to believe what he was seeing. Dr. Nathan rushed into the room, quickly checking the vital signs as Cole struggled to open his eyes. The bright light made him blink several times until he could focus on his father's face, now marked by tears and a trembling smile. "Dad," Cole managed to whisper, his voice hoarse from being intubated. "I'm here, son." "And this time I'm not going anywhere," Jonathan replied, his voice failing with emotion. Jonathan sat on the edge of the bed, his hands still holding his son's, as if fearing he might disappear. The words he had rehearsed during so many nights at the hospital seemed inadequate in the face of the moment's magnitude. His body trembled with suppressed sobs as he tried to find strength to express 18 years of regret. "Cole, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I did that night and abandoning my own son, I was unforgivable," Jonathan began, each word laden with pain. "But I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the son you became, even without my help." Cole listened in silence, his eyes so similar to his father's, studying every expression on the man's face he had sought to understand for so long. Jonathan's speech continued, punctuated by tears and pauses to catch his breath. He told him about Lillian, how fear and ambition had blinded him, how every success in his life had tasted bitter with guilt. He spoke of the night he abandoned him, how that decision had haunted him in every moment of silence. "I built an empire, son, but I lost my humanity in the process. And I had to nearly die to understand that none of it is worth anything without love," Jonathan confessed, his voice broken. "Sometimes we have to lose everything to find what truly matters," Cole softly replied. The following days were a slow process of recovery for both of them. Jonathan spent every spare moment in Cole's room, listening to his life, about Hannah, about the years on the streets. Each story was a stab in his heart, but he knew he needed to listen, needed to understand the incredible man his son had become despite his abandonment. The nurses observed the gradual rapprochement between father and son, noticing how the arrogant businessman had been replaced by a humble and attentive man. "She would be proud of him, Hannah," Jonathan murmured one day in prayer by his son's side, looking out the window. "She was proud, Dad, and she taught me that true pride comes not from what we have, but from what we give," Cole replied. Hospital discharge came on a sunny Sunday morning. Jonathan had prepared the entire top floor of his mansion to welcome Cole, but he still felt the tension in the air when mentioning the subject. His son accepted the offer to live with him, not for the luxury or comfort, but for the chance to build something they had both lost so long ago. As they walked side by side down the hospital corridor, the contrast between their clothes, Jonathan in his Italian suit and Cole in simple clothes donated by the hospital, seemed to symbolize the path they still had to travel. "Are you sure you want to try this, son?" Jonathan asked hesitantly. "I'm not sure of anything, Dad. I just know Hannah taught me that second chances are too rare to be wasted," Cole replied. A luxury car awaited at the hospital entrance, but Cole stopped before getting in, his eyes scanning the spot where he had spent so many nights sleeping on the sidewalks. Jonathan watched his son in silence, understanding for the first time the true meaning of wealth and poverty. "You know, Dad," Cole began, still looking at the street, "I spent years imagining what it would be like to be born into a rich family. But now I understand that true wealth was in the heart of a woman who barely had enough to eat but fed me with love." Jonathan felt the tears return to his eyes. Teach me to be rich like that, son? The mansion's gate opened automatically as the car approached. Cole observed everything with a mixture of fascination and discomfort, while Jonathan tried not to seem too anxious. The distance between them was still palpable, like a thin, invisible glass that neither of them knew exactly how to break. Upon entering the house, Jonathan showed his son the prepared room, spacious, elegant, but maintaining a simplicity he thought Cole would appreciate. "It's different from our little house in the community," Cole commented, touching the king-size bed with hesitation. "But we can turn this into a home, son." "If you give me the chance to learn how," Jonathan replied, his heart aching with the word "our," which didn't include him. The following months were a delicate process of rebuilding. Jonathan learned to respect Cole's pace, understanding that trust, once broken, needs time and patience to be restored. The businessman began making small changes to his routine, trading business dinners for simple meals at home, where father and son could talk about their days. Cole, in turn, brought something to the mansion that money could never buy: human warmth. Laughter began to echo through the once silent corridors, and slowly, the mansion's cold walls started transforming into a home. "You know, son, I never realized how empty this house was before you arrived," Jonathan commented one night, watching Cole cook a recipe he had learned from Hannah. "Sometimes we need to empty our hearts of pride to fill them with love, Dad," Cole replied, smiling. Each day brought a new discovery, a small step towards reconciliation. Jonathan watched fascinated as Cole transformed simple gestures into meaningful moments. The breakfast lovingly prepared, the stories shared during dinner, the laughter that now filled the once silent house. The businessman began canceling evening commitments to be at home, eager for these moments of connection. One night, as Cole recounted his childhood with Hannah, Jonathan felt tears stream down his face. "She gave you everything I should have given." Cole firmly held his father's hand. "And now you have the chance to give me something different, a future." The most significant transformation began when Cole shared with Jonathan his experiences on the streets. The businessman listened attentively to stories about people who, despite extreme poverty, shared what little they had. These conversations, usually during the morning coffees they now made a point of having together, planted a seed in Jonathan's heart. One morning, after hearing about a former street companion who had passed away due to lack of medical care, Jonathan surprised his son with a proposal. "What if we used part of the mansion to create a support center?" The businessman suggested, his voice laden with emotion. "Hannah always said that true wealth only holds value when shared," Cole responded, his eyes sparkling with possibility. The following weeks were of intense activity. Jonathan and Cole worked together on the transformation of the mansion's west wing, each decision made together, each space thoughtfully designed. The businessman discovered a new facet of himself as he watched his son lead the project with a wisdom beyond his years. During one afternoon of planning, Jonathan observed Cole explaining to the architects exactly what homeless people needed. "You have a natural gift for this, son." Cole smiled, touching the medallion around his neck. "I learned from Hannah that every gift only holds value when used to help others." Dinners became sacred moments of connection. Jonathan, who once barely touched his food during business meetings, now learned from Cole simple recipes Hannah used to make. One night, while preparing a stew together, Jonathan let a tear fall into the pot as he watched his son replicate the exact same gestures he remembered Lillian, his biological mother, making in the mansion's kitchen so many years ago. "Did you know you have the same movements as her?" Jonathan commented, his voice choked up. "And you're learning to have the same open and generous heart as Hannah, Dad," Cole responded, sharing a complicit smile with his father. The mornings gained a new ritual. Father and son walked through the mansion's gardens, planning how to transform each space to host people in vulnerable situations. Jonathan listened attentively as Cole explained the most basic needs he had experienced on the streets: a hot shower, a clean bed, a safe place to store his belongings. During one of those walks, they stopped under a large tree where Jonathan used to play as a child. "You know, son, I spent my entire life building walls, and you're teaching me to build bridges," Jonathan reflected, his voice laden with emotion. "Because bridges connect us, Father, while walls only isolate us," Cole replied, resting his hand on his father's shoulder. The transformation of the mansion was happening not only in the physical space, but mainly in the hearts of its inhabitants. Jonathan began to bring different stories home, no longer about million-dollar acquisitions, but about people he had helped during the day. Cole noticed how his father spent more time in his private office, reviewing social projects than in board meetings. One night, as he walked past the half-open door, he saw Jonathan crying over a folder of documents. "These are the papers of your birth," the father explained upon seeing him. "I'm turning all the companies into a social fund, with you as the principal manager." The news of the mansion's transformation into a support center shook high society. Jonathan's old friends questioned his sanity. Some even suggested that Cole was manipulating him to obtain his fortune. On one such occasion during a business lunch, Jonathan surprised everyone by standing up in the middle of the meal. "My son taught me that the true inheritance is not the possessions we leave behind, but the lives we transform. Whoever doesn't understand that no longer needs to be a part of my circle." When he arrived home and recounted what happened, Cole hugged his father tightly. "Now you are truly the richest man I know." The renovations in the West Wing were progressing rapidly. Each room being prepared carried a bit of Cole's experience on the streets and Jonathan's management experience. The two spent hours discussing every detail, from the furniture arrangement to the training programs they would offer. During the installation of the first beds, Jonathan found Cole sitting on one of them, crying silently. "These are tears of gratitude, Father. Thinking about how many nights on the streets I dreamed of having a place like this to sleep." The businessman sat down beside his son, holding his hand. "Forgive me for every night you spent in the cold. I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for each one of them." At the center's inauguration, the mansion that was once a symbol of power now overflowed with hope. Dozens of homeless people were the first to cross the gates, greeted personally by father and son. Jonathan and Cole, side by side, wearing their identical medallions, watched their lives intertwine for a greater purpose. A lady approached, tears in her eyes, thanking them for the opportunity to start over. "Hannah would be proud," Cole whispered, squeezing his father's hand. "She is, son. And this time we'll make a difference together," Jonathan replied, as the first rays of sun illuminated the beginning of a new journey. Time proved that the true miracle was not just Jonathan's physical healing or the mansion's transformation into a support center. It was the reconstruction of the love between father and son. Cole found in Jonathan not only the biological father who had abandoned him, but a man transformed by the power of forgiveness. Jonathan discovered in Cole not just the son he had almost lost, but the teacher who taught him the true meaning of wealth. The medallions they wore were no longer symbols of abandonment, but silent witnesses that love, when true, has the power to rewrite stories and heal the deepest wounds. "You know, Dad," Cole said one afternoon, observing the activity at the center, "Hannah always used to say that love is the only thing that multiplies when you divide it." Jonathan embraced his son, his eyes welling up. "And you, my son, taught me that it's never too late to learn to love." If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that is about to appear on your screen. We are immensely grateful to have you here with us. Now you can click on the links that are appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, filled with valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.